not Pastor Bruce. You know that. So for those of you who don't, my name is Kirk Davey. Pastor Bruce will be back, okay? So as much as I'd like to talk about finances, I'm not. But he will. He'll be back hopefully next week. He'll be back with us. At least that's what he tells me. So that's good. I was thinking about Mother's Day. Do you know how it came about here in the United States? I mean, I didn't. I'm a typical guy, clueless, okay? I did the normal things. I thought, okay, I got to tell my mom thanks and talk to her and that sort of thing and try to honor her. So I did those typical things, but I decided I would actually look it up and found out that Mother's Day started in 1908 by a woman by the name of Anna Jarvis from Philadelphia. She wanted to honor her mother. Her mother had already died in 1905. But she wanted to honor her mother. And so what happened was she organized at a church, a Methodist church, Andrews Methodist Episcopal Church in Crofton, West Virginia. And a lot of people came. And it was successful. And she ended up organizing Mother's Day, where it was recognized by Congress in 1914. And so we celebrate Mother's Day here in the United States ever since. And, what they would do is it was originally in the churches to recognize mothers and that sort of thing. And they would do various things. So there was this, I call it a homily, written by W.L. Caldwell. He wrote this in 1928, and I guess he preached this. And so let me read this to you. He said, "Well, we may pause to pay honor to her who after Jesus Christ is God's best gift to men, Mother. It was she who shared her life with us when as yet our members were yet unformed. Into the valley of the shadow of death she walked that we might have the light of life. In her arms was the garner of our food and a soft couch for our repose. There we nestled in the hour of pain. There was the playground of our infant glee. Those same arms later became our refuge and a stronghold. It was she who taught our baby feet to go and lifted us up over the rough places. Her blessed hands plied the needle by day and by night to make our infant clothes. She put the book under our arms and started us off to school. But best of all, she taught our baby lips to lift the name of Jesus and told us first the wondrous story of the Savior's love. The pride of America is its mothers. There are wicked mothers like Jezebel of old. There are unnatural mothers who sell their children into sin. There are sin-cursed, rum-soaked, and abandoned mothers to who their motherhood is the exposure of their shame. But I am glad to believe that there are comparatively few in this class." And I thought, wow, okay, that may not exactly be true today, that there's few in this class. There's probably, seems like today there's ever increasing mothers who fall into the wickedness that Caldwell talks about. But Mother's Day was intentionally to honor mothers. And Anna Jarvis herself actually, as the years went by, thought, Mother's Day is becoming more and more commercialized. And she kind of resented that and went against that. And certainly we have today, Mother's Day, who of you men out there haven't gone out to the card store and bought a gift card, right? Or bought a box of candy, chocolates, right? Or taken your mother out to a restaurant. So that commercialization, I'm guilty of all those, right? So we've done that, but and in terms of Mother's Day, and Anna thought, no, this should be honoring with the sentiment, not with profit, so to speak. Okay, and so we want to honor mothers. More specifically, we want to honor godly mothers, and that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today, about honoring God in terms of godly mothers. because we've got a well-known example for us that I want to look at, and that mother is Hannah. And you know, in 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, it goes through the story of Hannah there and talks about it. And then in your handout is the verse 1 Samuel 2, verse 30, which is kind of the overarching idea here. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promise that your house and the house of your father should not go in and out before me forever. But now, declares the Lord, far be it from me, those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Well, Hannah is a woman that honored God. Okay, and her story, she has these godly characteristics that I want to look at of a woman who honored God. But you know what? Those godly characteristics, they're not just woman's characteristics. There's men's characteristics too. So it's really for all of us. Whether you are a woman, you're a man, or you're married, father or mother, or you're single, or you're young or old. These are all characteristics really that apply to all of us here. And there are things for us to learn in this story about Hannah and how she honored God and her commitment to Him. So let's take a look. And so if you have your Bibles, you can open up to 1 Samuel. We're going to start right from the beginning and go through and talk about these characteristics. And so let me start reading 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. There was a certain man, Ramathim Sophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. Okay, I got to stop right there. Time out. God is not okay with polygamy, okay? He's not. This is not okay with God necessarily to have 2 wives. As a matter of fact, from the beginning of time, God had set out the biblical principle, okay? And 1 man and 1 woman. I know in our crazy society, we see lots of different things, don't we? Okay? Right? But that wasn't the way that God had set it up. He didn't set it up that way. As a matter of fact, let's take a little bit of we're going to do a sidebar here, a timeout. Just briefly, give me 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Okay? Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. That's where he sets this out. He says, look, he says in chapter 2:18, then the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. Okay, so do you see that word helper? That's the woman. Okay, and the Hebrew word is a noun in the singular form. It's not plural. It's not 2. It's not many. It's 1 singular, 1 woman for 1 man. And that's how God set this up. Okay, now I know this, and you probably know this. God had imprinted that in our souls. Okay, He had printed that idea, that concept in our souls, despite what society says, despite what people say, despite the fact that people are confused about this, and I personally think that they're being deceived, okay, by the great deceiver. That's what I think it is. And no, there's 1 man, 1 woman, and not only that, the helper is fit. In other words, suitable, or maybe comparable to man. That's that idea, okay? And he goes on in verses 19 and 20 and 21 to say this is how God created, okay, woman, and this is how it came about. And in verse 23, verse 22, God brings the woman to man, not the other way around. Adam doesn't go searching for her. God brings her to him, right? And then in verse 23, then the man said, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And I like to, some of you know, I say it a little bit different way, right? I say Shazam. Now this is a woman. So that's how the Hebrew is written, okay? It's written in that way. And so Adam knew it. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So the man and his wife were to become one flesh, two individuals, okay? They were to come together, okay, in unity and live their lives to the glory of God. That's how God designed it. That was his intention. So getting back to 1 Samuel chapter 1, so why did Elkanah have two wives? Okay? Well, Scripture doesn't exactly tell us, but I certainly can guess, certainly the culture played a part in this. In the time that he lived, they accepted polygamy at that time. They had to, in order for him to have that. Okay? So, especially when a wife was barren. And that's exactly what we have in this story. Okay? Now, there's other reasons, because you had to have many children to take care of the sheep, the herds, right? Or to take care of the fields, okay? For farming purposes and a whole bunch of other reasons. But I think it wasn't God's intention to have one man and two wives, or two wives and one man, or two men and one wife. It wasn't the intention at all. Okay, so back to our story in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 2. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So, problem stated right here. Okay, Hannah was barren. She's childless. And as a result, probably has a lot of shame about that. So, initially, back then, and even today, when a woman can't have a child, there's a lot of shame that goes with this. And not only that, back then there was definite thinking by the Israelites that, geez, you're barren, you can't have a child, God is punishing you. And that was the thought, okay? And so they believed a barren woman or somebody who had physical deformities or somebody who had diseases, that sort of thing, there must have been some kind of sin, you see. So the Israelites believed it either was sin in the person or it was sin in the family, the parents or the grandparents, somewhere along the way. And so do you remember, those of you who were here when Pastor Bobby was preaching the Gospel of John? So in the Gospel of John, for instance, John chapter 9, the first three verses, okay? So they walk by and Jesus sees a man who was blind from birth. Not just blind, but from birth he was blind, okay? And so the disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Okay? That's what they're asking him. And that's their thought was coming from what God had told them in the law. That's where it came from. It came from places like Exodus chapter 20. Chapter 20 is where we get the Ten Commandments, okay? So in chapter 20, in the first 5 verses, God had told the Israelites that they were not to have idols. And that if they did, God would judge their sin either on them or on their children or children's children, okay? By these diseases and physical deformities and whatnot, by poverty, by captivity, okay? And so that was their thinking. They automatically assumed that, and Jesus says to them, well, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So Jesus was giving them an example of, look, this man was born blind, yes, but it wasn't because of sin. It wasn't because of a curse. It wasn't because of what somebody did in the past and God was judging. It was because the works that were about to be done to him. And of course, Jesus healed his blindness right then and there to disclose in terms of who Jesus is. So that's that idea. That's the principle. And so that going back to Hannah, she's childless. She's barren here. And so that idea of receiving receiving a child was a gift from the Lord. Becoming a mother was a gift. But Hannah, she was, felt shame and had to wonder why was God putting her in this position? Okay, and so as the story unfolds, her misfortune results in God's glory. You see, and that's the point. So we want to go through this and talk about these points on your outline. I have seven points. What they are is 7 characteristics. Call them 7 characteristics. I'm going to say of a godly woman, okay? But it's 7 characteristics of a godly person, okay? Really, that's the secret here. It's not just women, it's men too. And so we're going to go through this, and we're going to, verse 3, come up with the first one. And the first one you should put down, passionate for God. Passionate for God. That's the very first fill in the blank there. And that's going to start in verse 3 to verse 8. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. So Elkanah is a godly man, okay? Even though he had 2 wives. He lived in Ephraim, and he was an Ephraimite. He was a Levite, as I understand it. And he knew the law, and so he would worship God. He would obey God's commands, and God's commanded the Israelites to go to the temple or the tabernacle and worship God, and that was at Shiloh, and they did that 3 times a year. So he did that. And even though he wasn't perfect with these 2 wives, he did lead his family to worship. Okay? So verse 4, on the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. So here we have a loving husband who wants to do the right thing, who takes his family to go worship the Lord, does that at least 3 times a year, and that takes, moving from this town to where the temple or tabernacle was. They didn't have a temple at the time, they had a tabernacle. Okay, temple wasn't built until King Solomon, okay, which is years and years later. But he would take his family and go there, so he was a loving husband. And he loved her so much that he gave her a double portion. Why? Do you think he wanted to fatten her up? Yeah. No. It was to show, this is the way they honored people, by giving them a double portion. Okay? So he loved her. He wanted to honor and show her that. He gave her the double portion. And what we also see in this section is that God closed her womb. Now, how many times does it say that? God closed her womb. Twice. And anytime you know this, right? When God says something twice, he's practically screaming at you. Okay? In other words, this is very important, that he closed her womb. She didn't. Elkanah didn't. Peninnah didn't. Okay? God did. God's the one who does all these things. Okay? And that should hopefully give you pause if you haven't thought about that. God is the one who opens and closes. Okay? And so I had to ask my question, well, why did God close Hannah's womb? Was it the sin? Was it a curse of some sort? And so, no, that's where this connection comes into play in terms of look, God in his infinite sovereignty here is using Hannah to bring glory to himself. Just like the main verse here, 1 Samuel 2:30, those who honor me, I will honor. That's exactly what's happening here. And God's using her situation. And you think, isn't that kind of a little bit cruel? Well, Peninnah made it cruel on Hannah, certainly, yes, to some extent. But it brought him the glory. And, the thinking back then, and I have to say, his choices are always correct in this, okay? God's choices are always correct. The thinking that God had promised to bless his people with many descendants if they obeyed him, that's what the Israelites were thinking, and Jesus is a barren woman, and she must not be blessed. And so turn in your Bibles there's a couple verses or sections on there. There's more than a couple. So Deuteronomy 28, and also, let's just camp out on Deuteronomy 28. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, so Deuteronomy 28, God's talking about obeying him and what happens when you obey him. Okay? And Hannah would have been aware of this. Deuteronomy 28, starting verse 1. And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. So what blessings? Well, he goes through the verses and start enumerating the blessings. So verse 4, right? Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb, and the fruit of your ground, and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, and the younger of your flock. Well, okay, same thing. Verse 11, drop down to verse 11. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity in the fruit of your womb, and in the fruit of your livestock, and the fruit of your ground within the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give. So it's very unmistakable here that God provides children. He's the one who does that, you see. And not only are children provided by God, but children are a gift from God. So he's the one who controls that. As a matter of fact, the principle is stated in Psalm 127 that I believe you're going to get in the service, if you haven't already been. Okay? That, children are a heritage of the Lord. Children, and you can translate that word as gift. Children are a gift of the Lord. So Hannah knows this, and so she worships and seeks God with her husband. And in getting back to Hannah's story, in chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, they tell us that her rival, Peninnah, the other wife, she would provoke and irritate Hannah, right? But how did Hannah respond to that? Did she respond in kind? No, she didn't. As a matter of fact, she continually stepped into, quote, the lion's den and went up and worshiped, even though she was going to receive grief. Do you see that? She was still passionate about God. She continued to go. And it was year by year. It wasn't just a one-off type of thing. Got the grief and said, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going there. No, she continued. Stepped right into it, heard the grief again year after year. Okay, that's what it's telling us. And her zeal for God, her passion for God didn't ebb in any way. She had great patience. She didn't retaliate, and so she continued to go to worship and to pray. And in verse 8, 1 Samuel 1:8, and Elkanah, her husband, her husband said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? I wish he would have stopped right there. He was okay with those questions, I think. But he says, am I not more to you than 10 sons? Oh. He's a knucklehead. Okay, wait a second. I'm a knucklehead too, okay? I've blown it too, just the same way. But he should have stopped. But he's thinking that he is the solution. Absolutely wrong. Right, ladies? Absolutely. He goes on to say, aren't enough for you, Hannah? I can just see Hannah. Maybe you ladies are thinking the same thing. You may be good for me, but that's not all I was created for. Okay? This saying or proverb came to me. You've heard this proverb about Elkanah here. And it's better to keep your mouth closed and let people think you're a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. Right? That's not exactly in the Bible. But what is Ecclesiastes 10:14. I can tell you that is. So Ecclesiastes 10:14. And there's other places, but this is the one I used. It says, a fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? Yeah, that's the point. That's the real point. Elkanah was helpless with Hannah, okay, to change Hannah's situation. Totally helpless. But, he's also seems to be helpless in the destructive interaction between Hannah and Peninnah, between those two. And I think he certainly could have tried to do better on that end of it, but I think he's trying to do the right thing here, trying to comfort Hannah, but that wasn't enough, you see. And that really idea that just wasn't enough for Hannah plays out in these other verses here as we go on. So we get to our second point here, that apparently her husband alone just wasn't enough. And that second point I have down is prayer in earnest. Prayer in earnest, and that's in verses 9 through 10, okay, as the second characteristic. And it says, after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, that's where the tabernacle was, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. So Hannah had sat down at the meal. She's offered a double portion. She doesn't eat any of the meal. She doesn't drink. She doesn't respond to Peninnah and her barbs from her and the things that Peninnah is saying, right? And she's distressed about it, but I can think that she's not saying anything. She's holding it back. Once dinner is over, she rises, okay? And she goes to the temple of the Lord, is what she does. And she's going to go there and pray, okay? And she's going to pray in earnest. So, Eli is the priest, and he's sitting there at the entrance of the temple, okay? And he certainly sees her in a distressed situation and probably anguished and crying type of thing. But for Hannah, what she's really doing, she's praying and crying out to the Lord. In other words, it's a heart issue. She's praying in earnest, okay? And was this a one-time occurrence that she did this? No, I think that this was an ongoing thing, okay, for her heartfelt thing. So she was, I think that she was consistent in her prayers and going to the temple and praying and laying out her heart earnestly to the Lord. And that's what that means. And that leads us to really the third characteristic here as we go on. And the third one is promise keeper. Promise keeper in verse 11 that talks about this, okay? And verse 11 it says, and she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. Wow. Okay, would you ladies pray that kind of prayer? I don't know. That's, okay, asking for a son or a daughter, asking for a child, I understand. But there was a second part to this. You catch that? Give him to the Lord? How about you? Would you ever do that? Pray that kind of prayer? That's a big one. Okay? So she's making a vow, and vows were solemn promises made to God. Okay? You know, if God does this for me, then I will do this for God. I will do that. Okay? The if then. So they're a strong commitment one makes to give and act and behave, right, towards God if God gives them the thing asked for. So Hannah makes this vow, and vows are a little bit different, can be distinguished from oaths. You've heard oaths, right? So we have oaths in our society today. So, you know, the vow idea is promising to do something, okay? Whereas the oath is more or less a declaration of a truth. That's what an oath is. You're declaring something to be true. Okay, and so sometimes we see in Scripture both a vow and an oath. Okay, we have those, like in Numbers, two verses here, Numbers 30, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 23:21. So let me read these to you in Numbers 30, verse 2. And here was the law on the vows. And God said, if a man vows a vow to the Lord, or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge. So here we have the vow and the oath. He shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Okay, so we have a vow to do something for the Lord, coupled with an oath that declares the vow is true and that he will do it, that there's truth behind it. And so that's an example. The other one was in Deuteronomy 23:21. So it's not only that you make a vow that you promise to do something, and you're declaring the oath that it's true, but you should be promptly fulfilling it, and that's the Deuteronomy 23:21. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it out of you, and you will be guilty of sin. Wow, okay. So, and the idea of making that vow to God, you should promptly follow through, right? And keeping it. Otherwise, you're sinning and profaning the name of the Lord. That's what's happening there, okay? And so it's pretty serious business, you know, making that kind of commitment. And God does not take lightly that the commitments we make to Him in terms of breaking our commitments. So today we have vows. The most well-known is the marriage vow, right? And we have also vow. We certainly have oaths today, and you go in a court of law, you have to say an oath, or if you become an officer of some sort, you have to say an oath. So we have vows and oaths today. They're lifelong promises, and we're declaring that this is true. This is right, and we often do that before God. Okay, and so forth. So Hannah here, she's making a promise to give her son to God completely. Okay, give her son to God completely. So when I was thinking about vows, what ran across my mind is a book that I read and a movie. I saw the movie afterwards, Unbroken. Have you guys either read the book or seen the movie Unbroken? So, story of Louis Zamperini, and World War II, plane went down the ocean, was on a raft with two other guys. One of the guys died on the raft, and he was floating on the raft for over 30 days. Okay? And during that time, he made a vow. And he vowed such that, God, if you save me from this, I will follow you and honor you and do the right thing, kind of thing. Okay? I will believe in you, and that sort of thing. And he went through some very harsh situations in prison, okay, by the Japanese. And he came back, but he came back alive, and he ended up marrying his wife, but he couldn't get those images out of his head, the nightmare dreams out of his head. And he started spiraling down and drinking and that sort of thing. And he put his marriage in jeopardy. And his wife said, we should go to the crusade, the Billy Graham crusade. And he agreed. And he repented of his sin and turned his life over to Christ. And declared that to a whole lot of people. And so we have an example of he made a vow, and then he kind of forgot about it and was spiraling down, and God brought his wife to him to remind him that, hey. And so he ended up carrying out his vow. So vows are very important. They're commitments. And here Hannah is making this vow, this commitment to God. If you give me a son, if you give me a child here, I will give that child completely over to you. Okay, so and so she's taking a step of faith, and that God would raise her son instead of Hannah. So that's that idea of being a promise keeper. Okay, and many of you men may remember the Promise Keepers movements a while back ago, type of thing, that we would make promises and keep our promises that we made to our wives, that sort of thing, and made to God. And so Hannah's, this takes a step of faith, and that's what she's doing, taking a step of faith. Okay? And that takes us to that fourth characteristic of a godly woman, and that's purity in thought. Purity in thought. That's the fourth one. That's starting in verse 12. And it says, and she continued praying before the Lord. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being a drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I'm a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink. In fact, she hadn't even eaten. Okay? But I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. So Eli observes her lips moving and assumes she was drunk. Why did he assume that? Well, probably because he was accustomed to seeing drunks at the entrance of the temple in the society that they had all around him. That was the moral condition of at the time. Okay, that's what was happening there. But Hannah, she's not drunk. She's pure. Okay, and she was so concerned about seeking God in her silent prayers that an observer would say that he would think she was drunk, that she must have had alcohol in terms of her outlook and with her lips moving and that sort of thing. And but her desire was to see God's will fulfilled, right? Okay, and she had grief and concern written all over. And she says this interesting thing in verse 16. She says that she's not a worthless woman. Okay? So that word worthless, the Hebrew word for worthless is Belial. Belial, have you heard of that word before? Some of you might have heard of that word before. So it was transliterated into the Greek and transliterated into the English. Same word. It's in 2 Corinthians 6, verse 15. That very same word. Where it says, in 2 Corinthians 6:15, it says, what accord has Christ with Belial? And it's in 2 Corinthians 6:15, it's capitalized B. As if it's a noun, a person. Yes. Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? basically saying, Belial, that's Satan. Do you see that? So the Hebrew word worthless is Belial, and Hannah's probably saying, look, I'm not a daughter of Satan here. Okay? I'm not. My prayers and thoughts are pure, and I truly desire that God grant my petition here. Okay? And so that thought, oh, that's interesting. So that leads us to the next characteristic here, number 5, patient faith. Patient faith. In verse 17, then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. And she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. So I'm not sure if Eli heard audibly what she was praying. But certainly after talking with Hannah, it was clear to him that he recognized God was in her prayers here. Okay? So Eli's basically saying, look, God hears and answers prayers here that are genuine and sincere. Okay? And as God's servant here and prophet, I mean, that was big for Hannah, for Eli to say that to her. Okay? So a godly woman hears from God. She's willing to listen, open up, and her ears to hear what God says. For Hannah, she heard from Eli, the priest, and he said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him. So back then, the word was spoken through priests and prophets. Okay? And that's how they got the word. And so I believe that God is speaking to Hannah through Eli here, the priest. And today it's a bit different because we have his written word, and God uses pastors and teachers to communicate his word to us. Okay? He does it also through prayer. Okay? And so for Hannah here, this is what was happening. And she was willing to hear, and because she had a patient faith. And she goes from, this is amazing, she goes from this great anxiety and vexation to peace and happiness, trusting in God that he would provide. And he did. Okay? And that's faith in action. That's what that patient faith is showing faith in action. Believing that in faith God will answer and resting in that. And so she's no longer sad. So she ate and drank, right? And God remembered her and opened her womb. So for Hannah's part, her part's not yet done. Okay? That'd be a great story if it stopped there, but it doesn't. There's more. Okay? And we have another characteristic, and that's the 6th one. And that 6th characteristic of a godly woman, perform her vows. Perform her vows. Okay, so now maybe you can see I'm using this P's all along, right? Down to perform her vows. You can say Hannah was obedient. That's another way to put it. That's found in verses 21 through 28. So 21, the man Elkanah and all his house went up to the Lord to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah, which he had a vow himself, but Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. By the way, how long does the weaning take? 5 years? Okay, so the Hebrew culture was 2 or 3 years. So we think somewhere between 2 and 3, they brought the child up to the temple here. In verse 23, Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And so that may the Lord establish his word means that Elkanah, he expected himself and Hannah to fulfill the vow. So he knew about Hannah's vow, and he assented to it. That's Numbers 30. You'll find that there. And he agreed to it, so he knew that the vow should be fulfilled. And so that idea, may the Lord establish his word, okay, there, he knew that, look, this vow needs to be fulfilled, so I hope nothing happens to the boy to keep it from being fulfilled. That's how serious it was. Okay? And that's what that meaning is, may the Lord establish his word. Maybe we'll be able to take him and actually give him to the Lord here. Okay? Because they haven't done that yet. The boy hadn't been weaned. So here we have the sequence. Hannah, she prays the silent vow. Eli says a benediction that God grants the request. Then God confirms the vow, allowing Hannah to conceive and bear a son. Now the only thing left in completing this is to present the boy to God. Okay? And so Elkanah is anxious about doing that, wanting to complete it. I think so is Hannah. Okay? And in verse 24, and when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. And she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and the child was young. Why a bull? Why flour? Why wine? Well, the bull was a burnt offering. The flour was a meal offering. The drink wasn't because they needed a drink. It's because they were offering a drink offering. So all of these indicate that they were serious in terms of presenting to God, okay? And so this was all part and parcel of doing that. So certainly we have these sacrifices in the Old Covenant. They did a lot of sacrifices, but it's also presenting yourself to, in this case now they're also presenting the child to God. So then verse 25, then they slaughtered the bull and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. So Hannah's presenting the child to the Lord and wants God to raise him up. And through Eli here, okay? And so she's not only obedient to following through on her vow, her commitment, her promise, okay? She's also telling others of this, of God's goodness, okay? So certainly Eli's hearing it, and anybody else who happened to be there, they're all hearing it, okay? And that's all part of presenting or performing the vow. Well, we have one more, the last one, okay? And that's in chapter 2. That's praise to God. Chapter 2, we have verses 1 through 11. And I have time to read these. Okay, so chapter 2, verse 1. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren have borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. What a magnificent prayer. Incredible. As a matter of fact, this prayer is similar to the one that Mary prayed. And if you want to do a little Bible study, put them side by side. You'll certainly be blessed by it, and you'll see. And many of the concepts that come up that Mary prayed are the same ones that Hannah prayed here. Okay, and it's interesting to me. You know, at the end he says he will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. That's the Messiah. Okay, and so we have a type of with Samuel. Okay, that she's praying over and praying to her God. And then we also have Christ, the Messiah, okay? And so she's giving, she's exalting God, giving him glory in this. And so that's what a godly person, a godly woman does, is praise. They're exalting God and giving God the glory. So Hannah had this passion for God. She honored God in her prayers. She made a commitment. She kept it. She was a promise keeper. She was pure in her worship. She was patiently waiting in faith that what God would do. She honored her vows by performing them, by being obedient. Okay, and she ultimately gave him praise. So these are wonderful examples of it, not just of a godly woman, a godly man too. These are examples of that, and we would all do well to remember this, and that's what she did. And the Lord blessed her, didn't he? So here we have the main verse, 1 Samuel 2:30. Those who honor me, I will honor. Well, the Lord honored her. Verse 21, visited Hannah. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. The Lord blessed her. Okay? And I wish we had time to look at that other part of 1 Samuel 2:30, those who despise the Lord and the resultant consequences. So we'll have to save that for another day, won't we? There's more to the story. So are we going to be ones who are going to honor God? Let's pray. God, we truly desire to honor you. We want to do the right thing. We have godly examples like Hannah to follow after. Sometimes these things are reminders for us, but yet they're just so vitally important for us to know and to think about time and time again. And I am thankful for your word that you remind us, and you have given us these godly examples of how we should to behave and act in this world and in our society today. We know that we have a confused society. There's all sorts of things, lots of evil things that are coming at us. And these are the type of things in your word that tell us this is how we should respond. This is how we should be. So I would pray that as we want to honor our mothers today, for Mother's Day, but that we would be godly people who would be ultimately giving you glory and honoring you. So we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.